strip away the magic systems and the stat sheets, and you will see that every single successful fantasy book out there survives on one thing alone, and that is tropes. And today I'm going to break down 5 massive fantasy tropes that we see over and over again, and I'm going to take a look at what makes a good trope, what makes it highly addictive. Where do we see examples of this in writing, in TV, and so on? So yes, there are going to be spoilers here. I'm listing them on the screen as we speak, so if you don't want to have your opportunity spoiled, just tune out now. But what makes a good trope? What makes something highly addictive? And let's look also at what makes a bad trope. What are crappy examples of tropes being used incorrectly? When I first started writing my own novel, I thought it was going to be just a lit RPG. And I spent weeks trying to figure out an original story structure for it. I'll be honest, every single writer out there wants to kind of secretly be the next person who discovers a new way of doing things. Until I realized that readers really don't want an original system. They don't want you reinventing the wheel. They want what feels familiar, what they can understand. They want what works. And what works? Well, that's tropes. So today I'm talking tropes, and I am going to refer back to Dungeon Crawler Carl and the Fourth Wing, similar to what I did in the last book, but today we're going to dive deep specifically into the tropes, into what works, what makes us love those stories so very much. And whether you are reading it for the romance of it, or you're reading it for the mechanics, or the high-paced drama, or perhaps a little bit more spice than we like to admit that we all like to read once in a while. Or even combat, because let's face it, romantasy is kind of boring if there's nothing happening. If we're all just walking around the park enjoying each other's company, yikes, that would be really, really boring. Just saying. And when we mention all of those, basically, we are talking tropes. This is what makes us absolutely love or hate a book. And hey, I'm Helena. I'm writing a novel. I started out thinking I was going to write only a lit RPG. It ends up that I'm creating a hybrid of, let's call it LitRPG-meets-Romantasy. And maybe a little bit of something like a video game like Halo. And on this channel, I explore both my novel writing as well as my kind of evolution into geek culture, in finding it late in life and starting to embrace really who I am at this stage in my life. And truth be told, I thought using tropes was going to be blasé. It was going to make my book boring and predictable, and I thought I needed to reinvent the wheel, to put something new out there. But I am very quickly realizing, both being a pantser, that my characters don't really want that, but also the fact that if I'm creating a book for me to just have out there, then fine. I can write a book that is original just for me. But most people don't write a book to not sell a single copy. So I realized I needed to kind of do what works. And I'll be honest, tropes work. But tropes also get a bad reputation, and probably where my disdain for them came from originally. I mean, people look at them as a lazy way of being able to write a novel. They look at it as a cheap shortcut, or even a kind of writing cliche. But really, when you analyze, when you are the person who loves getting into the weeds of analysis and all of that, you very quickly learn that people love predictable. They love a story that they can understand and that they kind of crave. People may want a trope over and over and over again, but positioned a different way each time. Now, before I start, just in case you don't know exactly what a trope is, it is a recognizable narrative tool, I guess you could say, or a theme, or a character dynamic. And some common tropes that you hear are forced proximity, meaning that people are put into a small area to kind of battle it out. Or the chosen one, the person chosen to be the hero of the story. The found family, the person like Dungeon Crawler Carl. He found family in the dungeon, something he never experienced from the time he was a child. And then common ones are enemies to lovers. Basically, your brain recognizes them and knows that there is going to be an emotional payoff in the end. And a lot of people will say a trope could be a cliche, but no. A cliche is basically lazy. It lacks depth. It lacks kind of luster associated to it. And if you think of it in the terms of music, so a G and a C chord can often be played across different music. And them on their own doesn't sound like much. But when you put them into play, when you put them to work together, that is where the magic absolutely happens. So if you think of it, the chord itself, G or C, could be kind of almost cliche, but playing them with rhythm and emotion makes them absolutely music, aka a trope. And if you do them well, it doesn't feel repetitive. It feels satisfying. Now, when we look at the different subgenres of fantasy, though, we look at LitRPG and we look at Romantasy. So Dungeon Crawler Carl, LitRPG. Romantasy is the fourth wing. And often online, you are either on Team LitRPG or Team Romantasy. It often doesn't cross over unless you are a reader who is okay to read across the entire fantasy spectrum. But often in Romantasy, you see the fated lovers or the enemies to lovers kind of tropes. And in LitRPG or progression readers, they're looking for hardcore combat mechanics as well as dungeon floors and leveling arcs. And we absolutely can use tropes in both of those. We can use similar tropes in both of those. But as a writer, you really have kind of the responsibility to make sure that your trope works. Even though you're going to add something like found family into a lit RPG like Dungeon Crawler Carl did, he did a service to it. But if you throw that in without kind of building up characters, it is going to fall flat. They're going to be like, what is going on here? But let's jump in and take a look at the 5 kind of common tropes. What makes a good one in a fantasy book and what makes it kind of fall flat? What makes it completely fail? Trope number 1 is forced proximity and squad survival. So if we take a look at the fourth wing and we take a look at Dungeon Crawler Carl, you have put them into a kind of area that they are forced to survive in. And in order to survive, they kind of have to develop squads along the way as well. They have to rely on others in order to get to a point where they survive and perhaps thrive. We're hoping for that, Matt Dinamum, by the way. We're hoping. But you also see this in video games like Halo and Helldivers. You're thrown into a proximity where you absolutely have to kind of survive the area and rely on others to do their parts. Helldivers, yeah, it might be a little bit more individual, but overall, everyone works as an individual to win collectively. And when characters are forced to eat together, to work together, to play together, to fight together, to do pretty much everything together, there is absolutely no way that they can hide their flaws, their foibles, their inadequacies, their Strengths even. It often forces the characters to develop faster, to grow stronger, to kind of level up quicker than they expected to. And when you put them into a small environment, into close proximity with one another, you absolutely create a high stakes game where people have to rely on each other. But what makes good force proximity or good squad mechanics versus bad squad mechanics? So bad squad mechanics would be kind of where you feel like you just threw people into a closet and they have to be forced to talk to each other there. Like maybe they weren't, people who got along and now they're sitting in a closet, they're trapped in an elevator, they have to kind of talk. I mean, that's boring. That's forced proximity as in area, but if they're not doing anything, then it's boring. And that would absolutely kill the momentum of a book, a movie, or whatever. Now, if we take a look at kind of good versions of it, and going back again to the Fourth Wing and Dungeon Crawler Carl, the Fourth Wing, the environment itself is built to try to kill the cadets. There is some high stakes for you to be within the college. It has high mortality and it also has high risk. But in the end, there is a high reward for the reader. Watching somebody get through that is satisfying. And it's even accelerated if we get to watch them do it their way instead of the traditional way, like Violet did. Being who she is, she had to do it her way. And it's very similar with Dungeon Crawler Carl. He is very much doing things that the AI has not seen before, that the showrunners haven't seen before. He is absolutely pushing boundaries after being confined into the dungeon, into this world underneath ours. And an example of me doing this in my own book, I trap people into an alleyway where they can't get out of, where they are stuck. And if they don't work as a team, people die. And in throwing in other tribulations, like communications being jammed, or perhaps things not working out the way that they want to, or just being ill-prepared for it, absolutely will create a lot more layers of drama rather than them just going in and kicking the crap out of everyone and winning. That, again, is boring. It's predictable and boring. And trope number 2 is enemy to teammates or enemies to lovers. Basically, high stakes friction between characters. And in LitRPG, you absolutely see the enemies to teammates happening. So we saw this in Dungeon Crawler Carl, where we have the crazy cat lady in Cuba. I forget her name at this moment in time, but we have her working with Carl and Donut in order to get there. Also, we have, the spider lady who works with Carl to get where she wants to go too. So, yeah, we see a lot of that in LitRPG as well. Basically, you're putting people together who are not expected to work together in order to survive a circumstance or an area or to get through a tough challenge. And in LitRPG, it's often people who have opposing skills that end up having to work together. So somebody who's a magic wielder works with somebody who is very combat focused. That is kind of thing that you would see in a LitRPG. You have the person who is a tank in there, but then you have the person who is taking down others, aka the wizard or the magic wielder, who is taking out the forces by mass casualty type of thing, or area of effect. And in Romantasy, it's often that two opposing characters realize they have to work together in order to achieve a specific goal. And often they are forced to do it. They are forced to work together. But along the way, with the fact that they have to work so closely together, often things happen. whether that ends up being a deeper friendship or it goes into the whole spicy world. And I will say, the spicy in a fantasy is chef's kiss. I wasn't expecting the level of romance or spice that the Fourth Wing ended up giving me. It was quite good, I'm not gonna lie. And I've seen a lot of men even say, hey, this is actually really darn good. So all you lit RPG fantasy fans out there who don't want to get out of your genre, you might want to give it a try. I'm going to guess you might like it. It's a little tickling, let's call it. But where does this trope go wrong? Where we see it going wrong is when that enemy's kind of barrier breaks down too fast, or when you have kind of more of a misunderstanding than anything. That if you were able to kind of put them together in a sesh where they talk it out, that their misunderstandings could have been resolved in kind of 30 seconds flat. That's where we absolutely see it go wrong. And often this is a Hallmark movie, and I think this is why I hate Hallmark movies so much, because most of the time it is just a misunderstanding that is trying to create this fake tension, which it's not really tension. And yes, in chapter 2, they are absolute sworn enemies, and by chapter 4, they're besties who are gonna live life together forever. It's unrealistic, and it ends up losing all of that tension that you're trying to build with them not exactly getting along. And good execution of this is actually, I'm going to say, kind of the opposite of enemies to lovers or enemies to friends. I'm going to say the friend to the enemy. And we take a look at the Fourth Wing as well, where we see Violet and Dane coming into the college as friends. And eventually that dissolves into more of an enemies type structure. That is a kind of a good use of the enemies to friends, but in this case, backwards. I liked it. I enjoyed the fact that she threw that in there. But also we see this in the Fourth Wing, where Xaden ends up being the enemy at the beginning and ends up being way more than a friend. Way too intimate with her body parts than we would ever think. But it worked. It worked in the book. It really worked well. And I will admit, in my book, I absolutely did not anticipate. Being a pantser, I did not anticipate that my lit RPG would start leaning into the romantasy side of the fantasy genre. The fantasy subgenres, I guess you could say. But it naturally happened for me. It wasn't something that I had planned to do. It was something that just naturally felt good. It felt like that was what the characters were going to do. And it's not going to be something that plays out immediately in book 1, but it ends up just feeling natural that this should happen. And I will say, not once did I assume that my characters would just click, that they would just get along. But it was interesting seeing that kind of evolution of where it took me. Now, trope number 3 is trial by fire. And we often see this absolutely in lit RPG, but it does exist as well in romantasy. We love to see that zero to hero kind of character. We love to see that person leveling up. We love to see the evolution of a person who is weak become an absolute specimen. That would be Carl in Dungeon Crawler Carl. He goes into the dungeon absolutely inadequate. I'm just going to call it what it is. He had a crappy childhood. He has a job that he did because he had no other choices. He is living with his girlfriend's cat while she is out gallivanting with another guy. She keeps cheating on him, and he just keeps kind of taking it. He's absolutely even oblivious to it. He likes playing video games and sitting around in his boxers doing so. And that's exactly how he ends up entering the dungeon that way. But as we go along, by the time we are in book 8 right now, Carl is the specimen. He is the Sigma male. He is beyond the alpha. He is the Sigma male. And it doesn't have to be a male. It can be a female. We see that as well with even Donut, who is a cat. We see her evolution to becoming this monumental powerhouse. And all of that is so satisfying. And that's what makes a great book, is where that progression happens along the way. It is something that is earned along the way. We get to see the trials, the tribulations, the fails, the foibles, to eventually get to a point where they thrive, where they not only are surviving, but they are thriving. They are at the peak performance, but we can also potentially see that they have more evolution to go still. And we also see this in the fourth wing with Violet. She starts out as the weakling and eventually works her way up to being kind of the leader of everyone. And her dragons absolutely see that in her long before she even sees it in herself. So let's look at good versus poor trials by fire. So a poor execution of trial by fire would be a Deus Ex Machina kind of version. Now, what is that, you might ask? Well, it is basically an intervention by a godlike, whether it's a godlike entity or a godlike situation that happens that kind of wipes out a whole bunch of things. That someone just ends up surviving because of an intervention of sorts that's outside of their abilities. So that would be an example of in Star Wars. Rey Skywalker becoming one of the top Jedis, that she can be the only person to really take out Palpatine, that she ends up becoming this hero without any true zero, without any of the steps along the way that we need to see for somebody to kind of level up, to become the person that she ends up becoming. She doesn't go through any of those trials. She ends up just being this kind of hero that feels so unrewarding when she's able to just deflect the lightning kind of powers back on Palpatine. Like, nowhere did we ever learn that she can wield that. And yeah, I know people will be out there saying, well, she's Palpatine's lineage, so of course she would have it. Well, it didn't show that she had the ability to do that all the way until the very end. It's stupid. It was the worst Star Wars movie that was ever out there. Anyway, yeah. I have a whole Star Wars analysis video if you're ever curious why I'm so passionate about this topic anyway. And what makes a good trial by fire? Well, again, fourth wing, we have Violet. She learns how to use poison. She learns how to kind of do things her way. She learns her abilities and she falls along the way and has to kind of figure out new ways of doing things. She basically fails so many times that it forces her to work outside of the box in order to get there. And in my own book, I will say that I use trial by fire a lot. My character has a lot of trial by fire right from the get-go. There is a lot of failure. There is a lot of development of each character, actually, not just my protagonist. There's a lot of development of every character in there, in the sense of inventory management, of weapon mastery, of understanding your own limitations and developing new skills around them. This is something that I absolutely took extremely seriously because I really hate the hero who becomes zero because they had no zero to hero exposure. Yeah. Rey Skywalker, I really, really dislike that character. But let's look at the next trope. Trope number 4. And trope number 4 is the found family, the party dynamic, if you're looking at it from a lit RPG standpoint. And I will say there is something so satisfying of a bunch of ragtag kind of nobodies who come together, who end up surviving, but then also thriving. And I will say the movie Goonies is that for me. The group of kids who have no belonging to be working together end up becoming the massive treasure hunters that they end up being at the very end of the movie. One of my favorite movies of all time. Also, Stand By Me by Stephen King, adapted into a movie. Bless you, River Phoenix. I miss you so much. But there's 4 individuals who have to work together, who shouldn't be necessarily friends, who come from different places, who have different personalities that end up being on an adventure of a lifetime. They find in each other, in the search of a dead body, a found family that none of them really had when they looked at their home life. And it is because you don't give one single character or one single player, you don't give them more to do than the others. They don't do more heavy lifting than the others. Even though you might have a standout character, it ends up being that they all collectively bring something to the table that allows them to do so well, even though their environment is absolutely trying to take them apart all along the way. So what makes good versus bad found family or squad kind of mechanics that work together? What makes it good and what makes it bad? Well, let's look at what is kind of a bad example. And that would be where everyone kind of feels the same, that everyone does the same, that everyone is the same. They have the same sense of humor. They kind of all dress the same. They all sound the same. They all feel the same kind of way about things. It feels like they're filling a roster rather than a role as a human being. And I was trying to find kind of examples of this, but if we take a look at WALL-E, where we see the evolution of what human beings become, where they're all fat, flying around on these little, like, kind of scooter things. That is an example of a bad found family kind of exposure would be looking like. That humans have evolved, that we are just individuals within a larger collective. Not saying the movie WALL-E has anything kind of bad about that. I am just saying that the human characters in that part of the movie is absolutely what I picture when I'm seeing some people who are basically cookie cutters of each other over and over and over again. We also see this, I guess, Stepford Wives would be an example of one. The character again, not the movie, but like the characters. And we also see this, unfortunately, in modern day society with the whole, and I know this might get some fuel, but the whole, like, where people want to be trad wives. Like, why do you want to be like everyone else? Why does that appeal to you? I don't know. Anyway, to me, that's an example of a poor found family, a poor family or group dynamic. Whereas obviously the opposite of that is the good. It's where everyone is collectively different, whether they look different, they act different, they bring different skills, etc. into it. And Dungeon Crawler Carl does this perfectly, with him being this physical specimen, with Donut being this magical entity, and Mordecai kind of being the coach around it, and Imani being the healer, and Elle being like the leveler, and yeah. Dungeon Crawler Carl brings this perfectly together. And along the way, they develop this beautiful friendship that I've got goosebumps, I'll be honest. That's the part of the whole book that I love, is that found family dynamic, that Carl didn't have this for himself growing up, but he found it in the group of individuals that he was forced to be with. That he ends up being with his chosen family rather than his expected family because of circumstance. And in my own book, I will say I'm leaning into this trope quite a lot. I don't want to get into it too much, because if I end up divulging too much here, you're going to end up just say that this is absolutely quintessential to my book, 100%. Now let's look at the last one, number 5. And number 5 is you touch her and you die. You know, the unconditional protector. This is the person who has such protective instincts that the thought of someone that they care for being hurt or touched would drive them to do pretty much anything to protect that person. And if we look at Dungeon Crawler Carl, Carl would do anything for Donut, and Donut would also do anything for Carl. But Carl would also do that for anyone he has deemed worthy of his love. And we do see this with Xaden in the Fourth Wing as well. He would do anything to protect Violet at the sake of his own health, of his own life. And often these people, they will lose control if something happened to someone that they love. And we also see this with Lena in Dungeon Crawler Carl when her brother dies. She absolutely loses it at that moment and starts devolving the person who she is, or the soul that she did have left. But let's look at kind of what makes you cringe, aka the bad use of this, and what makes good use of this as well. So a bad use of this, I will say, is the person who becomes a jerk for the sake of becoming a jerk. The person who is standoffish and who becomes an absolute nutcase without any kind of justification. I will say that the first book of Twilight, the whole Twilight series, I will say that Edward was the example of a bad use of this character. We saw him being an absolute asshole without having the insights as to why he was doing this. And yes, along the way, we learned that why he is doing it, but really it starts out this way. And it was one of the ways that I almost didn't even read this series. I ended up reading it all the way through it, and I'm glad I did, because it got me back into reading. I had a huge hiatus for a long time, but I almost didn't get back into it because of the fact that Edward was just such an asshole, and it felt forced and it felt unnatural. That is what I would deem as kind of that person who is a bad use of this trope. I would also say that 50 Shades of Grey would be, again, the other example that I can think of, really on the top of my head. And a good use of this is where it's not necessarily a weakling and somebody protective of them. I think that's what it was also with Twilight, was that Bella was so frail that Edward... Anyway, but yeah. It isn't necessarily that someone's so weak and has to be protective. It could be that where I see it well done is where you have two people who are equally balanced. They are equally as strong together, but end up being even better when, one person is kind of taking care of the other. And that again is Carl and Donut. We have Carl, who is a specimen, and we have Donut, who is a specimen. But Carl would absolutely die for her, and that's what makes it so good. And he would also do that for Katya. his found sister, I guess you could say. So this is an example of this trope being used perfectly. And in my own book, I will say that this is starting to play out. Again, I'm a pantser, so I didn't plan everything, but this is starting to play out as well with a couple of my characters. They are growing together, and part of that is that one ends up feeling so protective of the other or protective of the group, etc. It is something that has evolved into my story, and again, I don't want to give too much up because yeah, it's just part of, I'm still in the writing process, that's why. And it could change. It absolutely could change. So yeah, I do use this in my book, and it kind of evolved along the way, kind of like how characters evolve together. Now, that being said, when I started using all of these kind of tropes into my story, I ended up getting a way better story than I originally started out writing by bringing in high stakes and high stakes squad mechanics and character dynamics and different frictions and tension. It absolutely has made it a significantly better storyline than I originally had thought it was going to be like. And I'll be honest, when I started writing it, I was like, I'm not necessarily feeling this, but I allowed things to go the way that they did, and I'm very happy that I did as well. And even though I am doing a hybrid now of a lit RPG and a romantasy meets, I guess, military type combat or military light combat. Anyway, by combining these into a hybrid solution, I feel that it has kind of bridged the gap where me as a reader normally would feel that I'm either in one genre or the other. Even though I read so many different types of genres, I'm kind of melding them together, and it's making me feel like I am in a happy place. Anyway, more on that in a future video. Now, mastering tropes is absolutely a skill that you do have to work at. There absolutely is a formula to get it to work properly. And if you don't, it feels absolutely forced, it feels fake, it feels unnatural, and it doesn't satisfy readers. Now, I'm curious, for anyone who's out there, I encourage you to comment below if you have some bad trope examples that you have seen, whether it's in books, in series, in audiobooks, in movies, whatever the case may be. What is a bad trope to you? Which ones are your examples? Or what are your favorite kind of tropes that are out there or examples of them being used? If you do end up commenting, thank you. I really appreciate you. If you end up subscribing, hey, I want to say thank you because it does mean a lot to a small channel like myself. And with that, I really want to say thank you for watching to the end. I appreciate you.